So, guys, let me go ahead and start the discussion off. It's easy for a brand like Lowndes or even Valdosta, just everybody at the local level thinks that their team is a national brand. Now, I do have to admit that across the country, a lot of people probably do recognize the name of Lowndes or Valdosta, that kind of stuff. But when you actually start comparing your program to some of these other national powerhouses, it's a different story, right? So what I'm going to do is throw something up on the screen. Zach, this was the MaxPreps 2022 top 20 programs out there, final year-end rankings. So if you've been following high school football, guys, for any length of time, you recognize some of these teams like St. John Bosco, Mater Dei, Bishop Gorman. But every once in a while, you have some Georgia teams on there like Mill Creek. You'll have Buford on there. Lowndes has been in your national rankings before, certainly Colquitt County. So, guys, let's talk about the criteria for being recognized as a national brand. Joe, let me ask you first. So what do you look for when you deem a program a national program?
The formula is simple. If you look at what Miami Central did last year, in Zach's poll, they finished number 2. In our poll, nationalhighschoolfootball.com, they were our national champion, and they just got their championship rings a few weeks ago. They did what the formula is. You win your state, and you beat at least one elite competitor during the course of the year. Miami Central last year went to IMG down in Florida, Bradenton, Florida, where many public schools don't go.
Right. And
they beat IMG on their home field. And then they run the table in the state of Florida, go undefeated, and boom, they're national champs last year. Now, they've always been a national brand. I mean, over the years, off the top of my head, Miami Central has played IMG, St. Francis, St. John Bosco, Don Bosco, Bishop Gorman going on their 3rd time this season. So they've always been a national brand. They don't care if they win or lose.
That's right.
That's part of what it means to be a national brand. Doesn't mean you have to go 15 or 16-0 every year. It means that you have to play other national brands and you have to beat them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, Zach, let me throw that scenario to you, what Joe was talking about. So let's say, Joe, Zach, a couple years ago, Lowndes plays American Heritage to start the season. So if Lowndes takes out American Heritage, then runs the table, wins the state championship. So they're, according to your criteria, guys, they're automatically deemed a national power. Is that true? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, I mean, last year, if they would have beat American Heritage to start the year, they would have jumped into the top 25 just alone off that win. You saw how good American Heritage was last year. They finished ranked in the top 25 in every poll that does high school football rankings. And, they played Miami Central tough in the championship game too. Now, the nice thing with Lowndes and all the teams in the higher classifications in the state of Georgia, 6A and 7A, those are 2 of the toughest playoff brackets.
Yeah.
So usually teams that end up winning state titles in 6A or 7A in the state of Georgia, you're usually going to see them end up ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season. You saw it last year with Mill Creek, and then you also saw it with Langston Hughes, who was the 6A state champ too. So both those teams finished ranked in the top 25. That's a nice thing when you play in one of those big 4 states like Georgia, California, Texas, and Florida. If you do win a state title, you hit double-digit wins, you're going to have a very good chance to finish the season ranked in the top 25. And we saw that back in 2019 with Lowndes when Ja'Carri Brown was a sophomore.
Yeah.
That team was actually ranked in the top 5, but then they lost to Marietta in the state championship game. And they still ended up finishing the season ranked at, I think it was number 13 in our final top 25 poll. But if they would have beat that Marietta team was loaded. And that's the one thing I tip my cap to Marietta. They played some tough out-of-state opponents that year, and they ended up finishing the season ranked in the top 10. But I think, too, when you schedule tough and you play those out-of-state games, that's only going to make you better by the time you get to the playoffs.
Hey Larry, over the last 10 seasons, the 2 best years for Lowndes in terms of strength of schedule was 2019 and 2022. Okay, and that was because they beat Miami Northwestern in 2019, and as Zach said, if they beat Miami Northwestern and beat Marietta, they're a top 5 team in America. because of the Marietta loss, no big deal. They went from 5 to 12 or 13, whatever. In 2022, you had your second highest strength of schedule in the last 10 years, 47.1. That's because you played American Heritage. So that's that's the formula. If you could beat a highly ranked national team and run the table, you're almost assured of being a highly ranked team, not only nationally, but being a top 3 or 5 team in your own state.
Yeah, real quick too, Larry, like this year, Buford's going to play St. Francis Academy right off the bat. So if Buford gets that win right off the bat, you're going to probably see them jump all the way into the top 5 in next year's rankings. Right now, Buford, nothing's official, but they're going to be one of the teams contending to be the top ranked team in the state of Georgia when we come out with our rankings on June 26th. They're going to be right there with Carrollton, Langston Hughes, and Colquitt County. Those 4 teams will all be ranked in the MaxPreps top 25 to start the season. Just haven't officially figured out the order. But if Buford gets that win against St. Francis Academy, boom, they jump right in, not to just discussion for being ranked in the top 5, but that's going to give them such a big quality win at the beginning of the season where they're going to have a chance to finish the year ranked at number 1 if things fall their way.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Joe, let me throw this question out to you. Travis Hart. Travis Hart's got a good question, and I had a similar question related to it. Let me throw this up on the screen. Do a lot of these teams in the top 20 year in and year out recruit their players? Let me put that question a different way. A lot of them are private schools, right? And they don't have the constraints that public schools have. So a lot of those players at private schools, they gravitate to them. So they may or may not recruit. I don't know. That's a debate for another day. So how much or how important do you guys put an emphasis on their roster level as far as the players that are being recruited? Does it really hit your radar automatically if they are loaded with D1 recruits or no?
As you know what, it's going to be hard for any public to compete with the top privates. The elite privates in the world of high school football. There's, in my opinion, 5 of them: St. John Bosco, Mater Dei, St. Francis, IMG, St. Thomas Aquinas, Bishop Gorman. I'll throw in there. Those top 6, they're private schools. I mean, you have to recruit students to keep the doors and lights open. Blessed Trinity up in Atlanta. Marist up in Atlanta, they all, privates have to recruit students and student athletes. That's how they survive. There's no public funding. But power publics can beat them. I mean, Miami Central beat IMG. They've beaten Bishop Gorman before. They've beaten Don Bosco Prep before out of New Jersey, big power there. So, I don't buy that argument. I don't buy that argument when people always say, you know what, you should have 2 polls. You should have a private and a public. That's bull, because the publics have beaten the big time privates over the years.
That's right.
By you're cheapening the sport and those public teams by not having them compete and be ranked with the privates.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to jump on that too, is that, I mean, people need to, the landscape of high school football is different now than it was even 5 years ago, especially 10 years ago. I mean, you look at Miami Central, they're a public school. They had kids from Texas and California end up going to transfer there to go play in South Florida. So it's just a different landscape now. And you see kids in Georgia too. They move schools. A lot of kids want to go to a different school that's going to better their opportunity, get more eyeballs on them when it comes to recruiting. You see this in just about every state. I will say, obviously, some states do it more than others, but I would say even in the state of Georgia, you see kids leaving schools to go play for another school in Georgia too. So it's not something just a few private schools do. And there's a lot of schools that do this, that add kids from former schools to come play for their team.
Yeah. And guys, if you look over the last 5 years of the power publics in the state of Georgia, they all had kids either transfer in or move in, whatever you want to call it. Grayson, Milton, Marietta, Buford. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we live in America. Kids can go wherever they want to go to high school.
You look at Buford, they got Brandon Jacobs' son transferring there to play this year. You got Daniel Calhoun transferring to Walton to go play there. You saw a couple kids leave Grayson. You saw, Gainesville add a couple of big-time kids, right. One from Grayson. So, I mean, this is more common now than it was 5 to 10 years ago. And I agree with Joe. The best way to do it, especially on the national landscape, is you don't need to separate rankings for football, because a lot of these teams, you see even public schools will play private schools. You got Mater Dei playing Corona Centennial. You got Corona Centennial playing Bishop Gorman. You got Bishop Gorman playing Miami Central, and the list goes on. And we saw it last year, as Joe brought up. Miami Central went out to IMG Academy and beat them, a team that recruits better than any other school. So it is possible for publics to compete with private schools.
Zach, it's not only those power public states. We keep talking about California, Texas, Florida, East St. Louis in Illinois, a very, in my opinion, mediocre high school football state. In the past 4 or 5 years, they played IMG, St. Francis, St. John Bosco. They've played them all. And they're going to be playing St. Francis for the second straight year. Kudos to them. Kahuku in Hawaii. Great team out of Hawaii. I love these guys. Last year, they played St. Francis. And this year, they're one of only 2 teams in America that are playing both Mater Dei and St. John Bosco in the same regular season.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. So what both of you are basically saying is just win. Right?
Yeah.
Just
again,
win.
you don't have to, there are teams that go 14-1 and they're ranked in the top 10 in America with a 1 loss to a really elite team like a St. Francis or Gorman, somebody like that. You could still be nationally ranked and be considered a nationally relevant high school football team with a loss or two to 2 unbelievably great elite teams. It's not a big deal. It's not about the losses. It's about the strength of schedule and winning your state in the end.
Yeah, just to give you an example of what you're talking about, to illustrate rather what you're talking about. There were 3 Georgia teams that made the top 25 last year in the final MaxPreps rankings. One was Mill Creek. They had 1 loss, but they also were a state champion. Then you had Carrollton at number 22. They were 14-1, right? Almost a state champion, I believe.
Yeah, they lost to Mill Creek.
That's right. And there was another one to Langston Hughes.
Yeah, Langston Hughes, yeah.
Yeah, so it can be done in the state of Georgia. You're just going to have to win and run the table, and especially if you don't have an elite out-of-state team on the schedule. That's what you're basically saying.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, there are a lot of what I call, I like to say power publics, power privates.
Yeah.
I also have a category called poser publics, who go 14 or 15-0 every year and have really bad strength of schedules. They care more about their record being unblemished than being nationally ranked. And I won't mention the teams because some are in your state, but I will mention one, like Lakeland, Florida.
Yeah.
Lakeland, Florida goes 14, 15, 16-0 every year, and their strength of schedule is always in the low 30s. To give you a comparison, teams like St. John Bosco, Mater Dei, St. Francis, their strength of schedule is double that in the 60s. So, that's, you don't want to be in that category. Yeah, to be nationally ranked or nationally relevant.
Yeah, Lakeland ran the table last year, and I think they finished ranked number 14 in the country when you had teams ahead of, I think, American Heritage. They lost 2 times, and they still finished the season ranked ahead of an undefeated Lakeland team. It's all about who you play and how you play in those big games. I mean, you're going to have teams that had 2 or 3 losses that'll be better than a team that potentially went undefeated just because they're not playing anybody.
And Zach knows the state that is most known for this is Texas. They have so many teams at the end of the year that go undefeated and maybe state champs, and they don't get highly ranked because they don't get 2, 3, 4, 5 teams in the top 25 like they used to, because now everybody's paying attention to strength of schedule and elite out of state wins.
That's why you look at DeSoto. I mean, they lost 2 games last year, but one of those was to St. Francis Academy. The other was to Duncanville, 2 teams that finished ranked in the top 10. They won a state title in Texas, and they finished year ranked in the top 25.
And Zach, their strength of schedule was almost 50, which was phenomenal for a Texas team. Yeah. A team like Westlake, who in my opinion, again, is a poser public, might be undefeated and has a 32 strength of schedule, whereas DeSoto finished at around 50 because they lost to St. Francis.
Well, guys, let's talk about something a little bit closer to home that's still going to be nationally relevant. Joe, last year you put together the first Georgia-Florida challenge where Lowndes took on American Heritage. I can't remember who Colquitt played. Who did Colquitt
Deerfield
play?
Beach.
Deerfield Beach. Now, this year, because of some scheduling quirks out of Florida, you basically had to call an audible. You got us 2 pretty good teams. In that, now we're calling it the Georgia-Carolina Challenge. Colquitt's going to be taking on
Dutch Fork,
and Lowndes is going to be taking on Christ School.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Christ School is a nice little private school out of the Asheville area.
So tell us about those 2 matchups and what you expect.
It was hard, Larry. It was really hard. Tennessee and Florida changed their rules on us, unbeknownst to us, out of the blue. And we used to get a lot of those teams to play in those week 0 games. And now we weren't able to. For instance, the Freedom Bowl isn't happening this year. Normally we have 4 to 6 games up in Milton. It's not happening this year because we couldn't get enough out-of-state teams because of those rule changes.
Now, tell us about what do you mean by the Freedom Bowl? You put this on the last couple years.
We put. I have two events in Georgia every year: week 0, week 1-ish. The Freedom Bowl up in Milton, which is going on like year 5. It's been back in the day. Had 4, 5, 6 games over 3 days. Out-of-state teams versus Georgia teams, mostly greater Metro Atlantic teams. And then last year we started the Challenge with Lowndes and Colquitt, and we're going to continue that going forward. But it's getting harder and harder to find teams that at that stage in the year that can play on that August 18th, 19th weekend. There's only a handful of teams left who can do that. When there used to be maybe half the states in America could make that happen. So, like with the Freedom Bowl next year, we're gonna change the date to a later date, either Labor Day weekend or the week after. And then, we'll have to talk to the powers that be at Colquitt and Lowndes and see if we want to move the date too. But it's just getting really, really hard to get good quality teams to play them. Like we just talked about, we don't want to have this challenge and have any team win by 50 or 60 points. Those games on broadcast to a national audience on the Flow Football Channel. We want really, really good competitive games against 2 regional powers. So, Christ School, small school out of the Asheville area, they have some players. They won't have a lot of depth in the end, but they're going to compete hard. They always do. And Dutch Fork, we all know about Dutch Fork. Great, the best program in South Carolina over the last 10, 15 years. Tom Knotts, their head coach, is Hall of Famer. A legend down there. So with that last year we kind of had remember in the first game it was kind of a blowout. Colquitt took care of Deerfield pretty easily, and then the nightcap, the main event was the game that everybody was looking forward to. That's kind of going to happen again this year. It's just going to be shifted with Colquitt now getting Dutch Fork and Christ School playing Lowndes in the undercard.
Gotcha. Guys, if you're just now joining us on the Viking Nation Live, I've got on the screen Zack Poff. He is the MaxPreps National Football Editor, and Joe Maimone, the owner of Prep Gridiron Logistics. These guys are joining us on the program tonight to talk about the national football scene because Lowndes does have aspirations of becoming a national brand. Valdosta has tasted that in the past, not as much lately. So, Zack, let me transition and talk about Valdosta because they are part of Wintersville and Titletown, because there is a what I consider a marquee matchup because it's between 2 of the most highly decorated high school football programs historically, and that's Valdosta traveling up to Ohio to take on the Massillon Tigers.
Yeah, right? You talk about 2 winning programs. Valdosta, I think they have 944 wins, the most all time out of any high school football team.
Listen, this is a Lowndes program. You don't have to rub it in like that.
I know. I had to get it in, man. And then you got Massillon, Washington too. They have, I think it was 932 wins, and that's good for the 4th most all time. So you got 2 of the most winning programs playing it right off the bat early in the season. And that's going to be a marquee win for whoever wins that game. That's going to be a win that as you get later in the season, if you got double-digit wins, that's going to be a game you can kind of look back on. Massillon, they've won 24 state titles, but technically they haven't won one going through the Ohio playoffs because that happened in 1971 where they brought in the playoff system, and all 24 of their state titles came before that. So they're still trying to win their actual first state championship, actually going through the Ohio playoffs. And then Valdosta's got 24 state titles in the back too. Sorry, Lowndes Nation, but that's a program they're very familiar with winning. Things have kind of, I don't want to say down, but not to the level of expectation that Valdosta is used to seeing. Yep. I think the last state title was 2016. So
right.
It's been a little bit, but yeah, that's going to be a big game. I'm looking forward to that one. And then obviously the one Joe was touching on, Colquitt and Dutch Fork, man, that's going to be a big time game for either one of those programs. The winner of that game, if they're not already in the top 25, will definitely be in the top 5 after that one.
Yeah, and Massillon must know they have a really good team coming up this year, because not only do they host Valdosta, but they're also hosting St. John's out of Washington, D.C., and the top team from Delaware, Middletown, who's a nice little team too.
And last year, too, they were the only team to beat St. Edward. So, I mean, their team, they usually will play pretty tough teams, whether it's in-state or try and play one good out-of-state team. But, yeah, that's always a well-run program, too. That should be a fun game.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I'm going to throw out a scenario that I'm telling you, this is going to happen next year, right? So Colquitt is going to take out Dutch Fork. I'm just calling it right now. And then Lowndes runs the table and takes out Grayson and Colquitt. When that happens, you got to shoot Lowndes up to the top 10. What about that?
I mean, hey, I've always been, if you're winning big games and whether it's even just in state, yeah, you're going to have a chance to be ranked for sure too. We saw it before in 2019 when Lowndes, I think they were 14-0 all the way into the state championship game. And I believe I had them ranked at number 3 going into that game. So they were on the short list of teams that had a legit chance to finish in that number 1 spot. And if they go undefeated, they win 7A state title. Yeah, they're going to be ranked in the top 10. Any team in Georgia that goes undefeated and wins 7A state title, you're going to finish ranked in the top 10.
Yeah, and then Zach, if Buford loses to St. Francis, that even makes more room for him up at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Joe, going forward, guys, I don't know if either one of you know this, but, this is the last year in Georgia high school football that we're going to have 7 classifications. Starting next season, we're going to contract and consolidate, I should say, and move back down to 6 classifications. So Lowndes is going to be part of what we think is going to be a much bigger region next year. So there's going to be less, I'm predicting now, there's going to be less room for non-region opponents. So let's say you have 2 or 3 max non-region opponents next year. So I'm putting you guys on the spot like this. Well, given that, what are some good out-of-state teams that Lowndes needs to be looking at now to put on the schedule?
It's easy. It's those 6 that if you're going to have less opportunity out of state, you got to make it worthwhile who you play out of state. If it's only 1 or 2 games, you got to start out with the 6 elite privates: St. John Bosco, Mater Dei, St. Francis, Bishop Gorman, IMG, St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, right there. I mean, that you could Aquinas is right close to you. I don't think IMG is permitted to play in Georgia anymore, unfortunately. But you have, Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, St. Francis will come down there anytime. St. Francis came down and beat Lee back in, 5-6 years ago in the Geico. IMG has played Grayson. St. Joe's Prep, you got to throw in them there too. Milton beat them in Philly a couple of seasons ago, which was awesome. Marietta beat St. Joe's Prep that same year that Marietta beat Lowndes in 2019. So those are the teams, if you want to make it count, you think you're going to have a really, really good team. And this goes out to everybody, the Carrolltons of the world, the Gainesville of the world. You think you're going to have an outstanding team and you only have a couple of slots open for a premier out-of-state game. You got to think big now, because if you beat one of those big 6 or 7 teams and you win the state, you're top 5 team easy.
Well, Zach, one of our viewers, Travis Hart's got what I think is a great suggestion, and they're not too far away. What about putting, Travis recommends putting a team like Hoover on the schedule early on in the season. Is Hoover still considered a national brand?
I'd say he should replace Hoover with Thompson.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I would say this though, Hoover is still one of the top 3 teams in the state of Alabama. They have dropping off a little bit. Thompson's the clear-cut top dog in the state of Alabama. But I would say Hoover is still a respected team in the state of Alabama, and especially if you're a team in Georgia, you're not, the top 5 team in the state, but if you're in the 6-7 range, that could be a pretty even matchup against a school like Hoover.
Yeah, let's look what Buford did to Thompson last year in the Freedom Bowl.
Yeah,
that was a blowout.
Yeah.
That and that helped them big time. Buford runs the table. I mean, they would have been ranked real high last year at the end of the season.
Yeah, I had Buford I think they were 6 or 7 when they lost to Walton. So that kind of caught me off guard a little.
Caught all of us off guard.
Walton's always solid. They're going to be good again this year too. That's kind of a sleeper team. I'm looking forward to seeing in Georgia this year.
Absolutely. Guys, last question that I've got for you is, given the Georgia landscape, other than Buford, what Georgia teams do you expect to excel this year?
Zach, you can take this first if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Carrollton's right there. Julian Lewis, it's crazy that he's only going to be a sophomore heading into this upcoming season. I mean, you saw what he did in the state championship.
He had a heck of a championship game. Golly.
I mean, he pretty much broke every record. I know they lost 70-35, but what he did as a freshman last year, that's as good as any freshman quarterback's ever had in the entire country of all time. And I expect him to just keep getting better and better, not just every week, but every season drastically. Langston Hughes, they're going to be good again this year. And I think Gainesville is going to take a big leap this year. We saw them last year. They lost just to Langston Hughes as a competitive game in the 6A state championship. I think that's going to be a team that takes a big jump forward. Still not sure if they're going to begin the year ranked in the MaxPreps top 25, but they're going to be, if they're not, they're going to be one of the first 5 teams out. And then obviously I think Colquitt County is going to be good again this year too.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Larry, on our website, nationalhighschoolfootball.com, I started a thread, I don't know, a month or so ago, all about Georgia high school football. And based on the feedback I got from fans and also some of my coaches and scouts on the ground there, I put a little update. I'll read it for you there. It was posted March 22nd. Georgia teams most active in the transfer portal are Milton with 16, Gainesville with 25 plus. Coaches, we talked about, most talented teams come fall. Buford, Gainesville, Milton, Walton. Based on what I'm hearing from a lot of my boots on the ground there, their sleeper team that everyone's talking about is Parkview.
We know something about Parkview.
Hey, Mike Matthews, man, that's a bad dude.
Yeah. And obviously South Georgia, Colquitt is probably going to be my highest ranked team in our preseason top 25 from South Georgia. And we'll see how everything else stacks up. But, right now the meat of the teams, Gainesville, Carrollton, everyone's talking about are up north. Milton, I think, still going to be good. Even, I guess it's going to be the new coach's second year. So yeah, it's all, those teams that we just talked about. It's the reason I fly down to Georgia every fall to go to that high school championship weekend.
Yep.
So we'll continue to do that, especially now with one less class. Those games are going to be even better than they have been.
And hey, it's going to be nice too. You get Langston Hughes and Carrollton right off the bat too. So
hey, Zach, you know that you know how that happened. We had in the Freedom Bowl, we had Carrollton, Langston Hughes, Milton, Collins Hill. Those are the 4 Georgia teams. And again, trust me, I don't fail that often in creating out-of-state games, but we couldn't find 4 teams to play those 4, not because they didn't want to, but because of the rule changes we talked about. There was nobody of substance. I'm not going to bring a team, from Louisiana who's going to lose 70-0. There was no quality teams to play those 4. So now they're playing each other. Milton's playing at Collins Hill, and those 2 are playing, I believe, in Carrollton.
Yeah, it worked out perfect because those 2 teams are going to be ranked pretty close to start the year. Mm-hmm. So that'll be the winner of that game is going to have a chance to jump in the top 10 national poll for sure.
Well, listen, guys, thank you both for joining the program tonight. Joe, I got an assignment for you. You need to get on the phone with new Lowndes head coach Adam Carter and do your best to schedule Miami Central to come up to, because I know Miami Central would come up here. Let's get them let's get them to Martin Stadium.
They'll go anywhere. They were close to this year inking a deal with Mater Dei. It fell through, but instead they're going to Las Vegas to play Bishop Gorman. That's what I need. That's what they are, the definition of a power public. So I love. We spent some good time together last year at the Florida Georgia Challenge. You took me out to a couple quality dining experience that I'll never forget. I ate stuff that I've never heard of before.
Woodstack barbecue, Zach. You make it to Valdosta. I'm taking a Woodstack barbecue, my friend.
So Zach, this week, this next season on Friday night, you got St. Francis at Buford. I'm flying down for that, and then I'm driving down to Colquitt for the following day for that doubleheader and that main event between Colquitt and Dutch Fork. And it's going to be great
out there. We'll see. We'll play it by ear. So. Yeah,
and the fans are great. Guys. I mean, we met so many fans at Woodstock last year, and I look forward to meeting the people that post on our website all the time, like GA96 and all these other great guys. So can't wait to see everybody down in South Georgia soon.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for joining the Viking Nation Live. And you guys have a great weekend. Thank you for the great work that you do.
Hey, thanks for having us on, man.
See you guys.
Anytime, brother. See you.